The shovel struck metal with a sickening clang that echoed through Walter Briggs' bones. 10 years, 10 long years, he'd ignored that cursed mound behind his shed, and now as rusted steel emerged from the earth, his hands trembled uncontrollably. What he unearthed wasn't just a box. It was a tomb of secrets that someone had desperately wanted buried forever. Within minutes of prying it open, Walter's peaceful retirement would shatter. Strangers would circle his property like vultures, and he'd find himself dialing 911 with shaking fingers. Friends, this is a story about how curiosity can unearth more than just metal and memories. It can resurrect dangers that should have stayed buried. Stay with me until the end, and don't forget to comment your city below, so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Walter Briggs had lived alone for 12 years now, ever since Martha passed. The old farmhouse sat on 40 acres of Georgia red clay, far enough from town that he could go days without seeing another soul if he wanted to, and most days he did want to. At 72, with joints that creaked louder than the floorboards, and a back that remembered every paratrooper jump from his army days, Walter had earned his solitude. The property had been in Martha's family for 3 generations. Her grandfather had built the original house in 1923, though Walter had added the workshop shed out back in '85 when he'd taken up woodworking to keep his hands busy during Martha's first bout with cancer. She'd beaten at that time lived another 23 years before the second round took her. Now the shed stood as a monument to better days filled with half-finished projects. He couldn't bear to complete a rocking chair that would never hold his granddaughter, a jewelry box that would never grace Martha's dresser. It was behind this shed that the mound first appeared. Walter couldn't say exactly when he'd first noticed it, maybe 2014, maybe earlier. Time had a way of blurring together when you lived alone, seasons bleeding into one another like watercolors in the rain. What he did remember was thinking it odd how the grass never quite took to that spot, how even the stubborn kudzu that devoured everything else in Georgia seemed to give it a wide berth. Probably just settling, he'd told himself that first summer, the way men do when they don't want to deal with something. Ground shifts. Things move underground. His nearest neighbor, Pete Hawkins, had joked about it during one of their fence line conversations. Pete was younger, maybe 60, still worked part-time at the hardware store in town. "You got yourself a gold mine there, Walter," Pete had laughed, pointing at the small rise with his coffee mug. "Maybe some Confederate gold, eh? Or knowing this area probably where someone buried their moonshine during Prohibition." Walter had chuckled along, but something about the mound made him uneasy. It wasn't just that it was there, it was how it seemed to grow. Not quickly, mind you, so slowly that he could almost convince himself he was imagining it. But photographs didn't lie, and when he'd compared a picture from Martha's funeral gathering in 2012 to one his daughter Sarah had taken during her last visit in 2019, the difference was undeniable. The mound had risen nearly 2 feet. "Dad, you should really check that out," Sarah had said, frowning at the comparison on her phone screen. "Could be a broken water line or something. Remember what happened to the Johnsons? Their whole foundation cracked because of an underground leak." But Walter had waved her off. Sarah lived in Atlanta now, came by maybe 3 times a year. She didn't understand that when you reached a certain age, you learned to leave well enough alone. Some stones didn't need turning. Some questions didn't need answers. Still, the mound haunted him in quiet ways. On winter mornings, he'd notice how frost melted from its peak, first as if something below generated its own heat. During the drought of 2018, when even the old oak by the house shed its leaves early, the earth above the mound stayed somehow darker, moister than the cracked clay around it. And there were the sounds, not often, but sometimes usually during storms, when the rain hammered the shed's tin roof. Walter could swear he heard something else, a resonance, like water hitting hollow metal deep underground. He started avoiding that side of the shed altogether. Told himself it was because his bad knee made it hard to navigate the uneven ground, but that wasn't entirely true. The truth was something he couldn't quite articulate even to himself. The mound felt like a sleeping thing he didn't want to wake. The years passed in the rhythm of solitary life. Coffee at dawn on the front porch. Breakfast at the kitchen table where Martha's chair still sat empty. Mornings in the workshop, though, he produced less and less. His hands weren't as steady, his eyes not as sharp. Lunch, usually something simple. Afternoons reading or watching the news, though lately, the news just made him angry and sad in equal measure. Dinner bed repeat. His daughter called every Sunday. His son Michael less frequently. He was stationed in Germany career military, like his old man had been. Walter had 2 grandchildren he'd seen exactly twice since Martha died. They lived their lives through screens, now updates, and photos on that Facebook thing Sarah had set up for him, but he rarely checked. "You should get out more, Dad," Sarah would say during their calls. "Join the VFW. Go to church. Martha wouldn't want you living like a hermit." But Martha wasn't here to want anything anymore, was she? And Walter had learned that grief was like that mound behind the shed. It grew slowly, steadily, until one day you realized it had reshaped the entire landscape of your life. It was February 2024 when everything changed. An ice storm had knocked out power for 3 days, and Walter had been forced to use the generator he kept in the shed. While dragging it out, he'd slipped on the ice and fallen hard, his shoulder hitting the edge of the mound. The impact had knocked the wind out of him, but it was what he'd felt beneath him that made him lie there stunned for a full minute. The ground had rung hollow, not like frozen earth should, not like clay or rock or even a buried log. It had rung like metal, deep, resonant, unmistakable. Walter had struggled to his feet, his shoulders screaming, and limped back to the house without the generator. He'd spent that cold night wrapped in every blanket he owned, but it wasn't the temperature that kept him awake. It was the knowledge that something substantial lay beneath that mound, something that had been placed there deliberately, something that had been waiting all this time. For the next few weeks, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He'd catch himself staring out the kitchen window at the mound while his coffee grew cold. He'd wake at night certain he'd heard something movement maybe, or metal shifting against earth. During a particularly vivid dream, he saw hands, dozens of hands pushing up from beneath the soil, and woke gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted out. "You're being ridiculous," he told his reflection one morning, disgusted with himself. "It's probably an old septic tank, or a cistern, farms full of old junk buried everywhere." But he knew the locations of all the septic systems, had replaced 2 of them himself over the years. And Martha's grandfather had been meticulous about documenting the farm's infrastructure, every well and water line mapped in a leather journal Walter still kept in the desk. March arrived with its false promises of spring. Daffodils pushed through around the front porch, and the dogwoods began showing their first shy buds. Walter found himself spending more time outside, ostensibly preparing the garden beds Martha had loved, but really circling closer and closer to the shed, to the mound, like a satellite caught in a decaying orbit. One morning he took his coffee out there and simply stood studying it. The mound was roughly oval, maybe 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. The soil was darker than the surrounding earth, almost black in places, and completely bare of vegetation. Even the persistent chickweed that invaded every other inch of his property avoided it. Walter reached out with his boot and tapped the peak of the mound. The sound was muffled, but distinctly metallic. He tapped again harder. This time he could swear he felt a vibration travel up through his foot into his leg like a tuning fork struck underground. "What are you hiding?" he whispered, then felt foolish. 72 years old and talking to dirt. But that night he couldn't stop thinking about it. He pulled out Martha's grandfather's journal, scanning through the yellowed pages by lamplight. There were detailed notes about the original well, the barn that had burned in Kate 47, the storm cellar they'd filled in after the oak tree fell on it in 78. But nothing about that area behind the shed. Nothing at all. Walter even called Pete Hawkins, trying to seem casual. "Hey, Pete, you ever hear any stories about this property? You know, from the old-timers? Your dad knew Martha's family pretty well, didn't he?" "Sure did," Pete replied. "Why?" "You finally gonna dig up that treasure behind your shed?" He laughed. But when Walter didn't join in, Pete's tone shifted. "Everything all right, Walter?" "Fine, fine. Just curious about the history is all. Man gets to thinking when he's alone too much." "Well, let me think." Walter could hear Pete scratching his beard through the phone. "Dad used to say something about Martha's uncle, not her real uncle, but great-uncle maybe. Came back from Korea all messed up. Lived in a trailer on the property for a while in the 50s, then just up and disappeared one day. Family assumed he'd gone off to drink himself to death somewhere. Sad story." "Why?" "No reason, just wondering about the family history. Sarah's been asking about it." It was a lie, but Pete didn't push. After they hung up, Walter sat in his armchair staring at nothing. Korea. The 1950s. That would have been, what, 70 years ago? About the right time for something buried to start working its way up through the soil, for the earth to shift and settle and reveal what was meant to stay hidden. He went to bed that night determined to leave it alone. Whatever was down there had kept for 70 years. It could keep forever as far as he was concerned. Some secrets were buried for good reasons. But the human mind is a treacherous thing, especially in the small hours when sleep won't come. Walter found himself constructing elaborate scenarios. What if it was a body Martha's great-uncle murdered and buried in secret? What if it was stolen goods? What if it was something dangerous, old chemicals maybe, or ammunition? The farmhouse had stood through the Cold War. People had done strange things during those paranoid years. By dawn, he'd worked himself into such a state that he knew he'd never have peace until he knew what lay beneath that mound. The not knowing would eat at him like acid, dissolving what little equanimity he'd managed to build in his widowed years. Just a quick look, he told himself as he pulled on his work boots. Just enough to see what it is. Then I'll cover it back up and forget about it. The morning was cool and damp fog lying thick in the hollows. Dew soaked through his jeans as he walked to the shed, shovel in hand. For a moment, standing before the mound with the tool raised, he felt like a grave robber. The thought almost stopped him. Almost. The first strike of the shovel sent shockwaves up his arms. The blade had hit something hard barely 6 inches down. Walter's heart began to race. He scraped away more dirt, revealing what looked like rusted metal, flat, extensive. Not a pipe or tank. Something with corners, something rectangular. He worked faster now, decades of farm labor overcoming his arthritis, his bad knee, his 72 years. Dirt flew. The shape emerged, a box perhaps 3 feet by 2 feet made of what had once been heavy-gauge steel, now rust-red and pitted but still solid. Walter stood back, breathing hard, sweat running into his eyes despite the cool morning. The box was still partially buried, but he could see enough. There was a lock, or had been rust had long since claimed it. The edges were sealed with what looked like tar or pitch black and cracked with age. This wasn't something casually discarded. This had been buried with purpose, with intention. Lord, Walter breathed, what have I found? He should have stopped then. Should have covered it back up, called Sarah, called the police, called someone. But the box drew him like a magnet draws iron filings. He had to know. After all these years of growing beneath his feet, pushing up through the earth, like some slowly germinating seed, the secret demanded to be revealed. Walter fetched his pry bar from the shed. The lock broke easily, rust crumbling like old bone. The lid resisted at first, the tar seal holding stubbornly, then gave way with a sound like tearing fabric. The smell hit him first, not decay, thankfully, but something else. Gun oil. Old leather. The mysterious scent of time itself trapped and concentrated. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth, but now flaked away at his touch, lay artifacts of a life interrupted. A uniform folded with military precision despite the years. United States Army Korean War era. Sergeant's stripes on the sleeves. A name tape, King. T dog tags on a chain green with verdigris, King Thomas K. 374889021. Type O. O. Protestant. Walter's hand shook as he lifted them. The metal was cold, far colder than it should have been. Beneath the uniform, a Colt .45, the classic 1911 model still gleaming with old oil. A box of ammunition, the brass cases tarnished but intact. A leather wallet cracked and brittle. And bundles. God almighty, bundles of money. Old bills, 20s and 50s, more than Walter had ever seen in one place. But it was the letters that made his blood run cold. A stack of them tied with string that disintegrated at his touch. The top one was dated March 15th, 1953. The handwriting was feminine, careful. My darling Thomas, I pray this reaches you. They came again last night. The man with the scar says you have something that belongs to him. He says he knows you're coming home soon. Please, my love, whatever you've done, whatever you've taken, give it back. I'm frightened. Your loving wife, Margaret. Walter set the letter down with trembling fingers. Another dated 2 weeks later. Thomas, I'm leaving town, taking Bobby and going to my sister's in California. The man came to the house. He had others with him. They searched everything. He said to tell you that he's patient, but not forever patient. He said you'd understand. Please don't come home. Meet us in California. All my love, M. A third letter, different handwriting, blocky and aggressive. Sergeant King, you have something that belongs to certain interested parties. The unfortunate incident in Pusan was regrettable, but need not be repeated. Return what was taken and all debts will be considered paid. You have until April 30th. After that, we cannot guarantee the safety of your family. No signature, no date. But the threat was clear as mountain water. Walter sat back on his heels, his mind racing. Thomas King Martha's great-uncle it had to be hadn't disappeared. He'd come home from Korea with something he shouldn't have had. Money, from the looks of it. Stolen blood money. Payment for something unspeakable. And he'd buried it here on family land, then vanished to protect his wife and child. Or maybe he hadn't vanished voluntarily at all. Walter looked at the money again. Thousands of dollars, maybe tens of thousands. A fortune in 1953, worth killing for then. Maybe worth killing for now. As if summoned by that thought, he heard an engine. Not unusual the county road ran past his property, but this engine was slowing, stopping. Walter quickly closed the box, though the broken lock wouldn't secure it. He stood his knees protesting and walked casually around the shed as a pickup truck sat idling at his gate. The driver was nobody he recognized. Younger man, maybe 40, with the kind of careful grooming that suggested city rather than country. He wore sunglasses despite the morning fog, and didn't get out of the truck, just sat there watching. Walter raised a hand in the universal rural greeting. The man didn't wave back. After a moment that stretched like taffy, the truck moved on slowly as if the driver was memorizing everything he saw. Walter's mouth had gone dry as August dust. He walked back to the box, his mind made up. Whatever this was, it was too big for him, too old, too dangerous. He needed help, but when he turned to go back to the house to call, who the police, Sarah? He saw something that made his blood freeze. Fresh tire tracks in the dew-wet grass, not from the road, but from the back of his property where the old logging trail cut through. Someone had been here during the night. Someone had been watching. Walter looked down at the box, at the letters scattered around it, at the gun that had waited 70 years in the dark. Thomas King had buried this for a reason. He'd run for a reason. And now Walter had disturbed something that should have stayed buried, awakened something that had been patiently sleeping. The morning fog was lifting, revealing a world that suddenly seemed full of hidden eyes and patient watchers. Walter gathered the letters, stuffing them in his pockets. The gun, too, if trouble was coming, he'd rather have it than not. Then he covered the box with the loose dirt, a futile gesture, but all he could think to do. As he walked back to the house, legs unsteady, heart hammering, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just started a clock ticking. Somewhere someone had been waiting for this box to surface. And now they knew it had. The shovel dragged behind him, leaving a line in the grass like a signature, or a challenge. Inside the house, Walter locked the door, something he rarely did during the day, and looked at the phone. Such a simple thing, calling for help. But once he made that call, there would be no going back. The quiet life he'd built in his grief would shatter like glass. Through the kitchen window, he could see the mound-disturbed earth dark against the grass. It no longer looked like a mystery to be solved. It looked like a grave that had refused to stay quiet. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible, but definitely there came the sound of engines. Multiple engines. Coming closer. Walter picked up the phone, his finger hovering over the 9. The first digit of a call that would change everything. The letters in his pocket felt heavy as stones, each one a testimony to fear and desperation from 7 decades past. Thomas King had tried to bury his secrets and failed. They'd found their way to the surface eventually, as secrets always do. The engines were definitely closer now. Walter's finger pressed down on the 9 just as the first vehicle turned into his driveway. Then the 1. His hand was shaking so badly he had to redial twice before getting it right. Through the kitchen window, he watched a black SUV roll slowly up the gravel drive, followed by that same pickup truck from earlier. The dispatcher's voice seemed to come from very far away. 911, what's your emergency? This is Walter Briggs out on Old Harrison Road. I need police here right away. I found something buried on my property, and now there are people here who... who I think might be dangerous. Sir, are you in immediate danger? The vehicles had stopped near his front porch. 3 men got out of the SUV, all wearing dark clothes, all moving with the kind of casual confidence that made Walter's old military instincts scream danger. The driver of the pickup stayed behind the wheel. Yes, Walter said quietly. Yes, I believe I am. We're dispatching units to your location now, Mr. Briggs. Stay on the line with me. Can you get somewhere safe? Walter almost laughed. Safe. He was a 72-year-old man alone in a farmhouse with arthritis and a bad knee. The Colt he'd taken from the box sat heavy in his jacket pocket, but he hadn't fired a weapon since Vietnam, and these men looked like they did this sort of thing regularly. I'll do my best, he told the dispatcher, then set the phone down without hanging up, leaving the line open as he'd learned to do in the Army. Create a record. Leave evidence. The knock on his door was polite, almost friendly. Walter didn't move from the kitchen, calling out instead, "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "Mr. Briggs?" The voice was smooth, educated, with just a trace of Southern accent. "My name is David Carson. I believe you may have found something that belongs to my family. We'd very much like to discuss it with you." "I don't know what you're talking about," Walter called back. Through the window, he could see one of the men circling around toward the back of the house. His mouth had gone completely dry. "Mr. Briggs, please. We know you've been digging behind your shed. We know what you found. This doesn't have to be unpleasant. My grandfather had business with Thomas King many years ago. Unfinished business. We're simply here to conclude that transaction." Grandfather. So this had been passed down through generations, this patient waiting, this watching. Walter thought of the letter with its threatening tone, its promise that debts would be paid. Apparently some debts never died. "Whatever business your grandfather had with Thomas King ended when King disappeared," Walter said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "There's nothing here for you." There was a pause. When Carson spoke again, his tone had shifted harder now, the velvet stripped away to reveal iron underneath. "Mr. Briggs, you seem like a reasonable man. A veteran, I understand. A man who knows that some battles aren't worth fighting. We're going to come in now. We're going to retrieve what's ours, and then we're going to leave. You can make this easy, or you can make it very, very difficult. The choice is yours." Walter heard glass breaking in the back of the house. The man who'd circled around. His hand found the Colt in his pocket, the metal warm now from his body heat. "The police are already on their way," he said loudly. "I called them before you got here." Another pause. Then Carson laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "No, Mr. Briggs, you didn't. We've been monitoring your phone since yesterday. You've made exactly 2 calls in the past week, one to your daughter in Atlanta, one to Pete Hawkins about family history. But please feel free to call them now. We'll be done here long before they arrive." The back door splintered. Walter moved without thinking, muscle memory from a war 50 years past taking over. He dropped behind the kitchen island as the man came through, pulled the Colt, and fired twice into the ceiling. The sound was enormous in the enclosed space, and plaster rained down like snow. "Stay back," he shouted. "I'm armed, and I will defend myself." The man in the back doorway had frozen hands raised. Through the ringing in his ears, Walter heard Carson's voice from the front. Now, Mr. Briggs. There's no need for that. Nobody wants anyone to get hurt here. We're all reasonable men." "Reasonable men don't break into other people's homes," Walter shot back. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. When was the last time he'd taken his heart medication? This morning. Last night. He couldn't remember. "You're right, of course. My apologies for the dramatics. Mitchell, step back outside, please." The man in the doorway slowly retreated. Walter stayed crouched behind the island, the Colt growing heavy in his hand. How many rounds did he have? The box from Thomas King's burial had held a full clip, but was it loaded? He couldn't check without revealing his position. "Here's what I propose." Carson continued, his voice maddeningly calm. "You tell us where the money is, we retrieve it, and we leave. No harm to you, no damage to your property beyond what's already done. We can even leave you a finder's fee, say $10,000. Consider it a gift for your trouble." "It's not about money," Walter said. though even as he spoke, he wondered if that was true. What was it about protecting a 70-year-old's secret, defending the honor of a man he'd never met? Then what is it about Mr. Briggs' pride principle? Those are luxuries for younger men. You're, 75? You have maybe 10 good years left if you're lucky. Why spend them looking over your shoulder? Because I promise you, if we leave here empty-handed, you'll never have another peaceful moment. We've waited 3 generations for this. We can wait a little longer. Walter's knee was screaming from his crouched position. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. The Colt wavered in his grip. Through the kitchen window, he could see the mound behind the shed, the disturbed earth like a wound in the ground. All of this for money. Blood money, probably. Money that had destroyed Thomas King's life and was now reaching out across the decades to destroy his. "The money's not here," Walter said finally. "I found the box, yes, but there was no money in it. Just old army things, uniforms, letters, personal effects." "You're lying." Carson's voice had gone cold. "We know exactly what was in that box. $300,000 in cash payment for certain services rendered in Korea. Services that my grandfather facilitated and that Sergeant King decided he didn't need to pay for. 300,000. In 1953, money. Walter's mind reeled at the figure. What kind of services commanded that kind of payment? What had Thomas King done in that war? Even if that was true, Walter said, the money would be worthless now. Those old bills, they'd have to be declared explained. Serial numbers traced. You'd never be able to use them. Carson laughed again. You really don't understand, do you? This isn't about the monetary value. It's about settling accounts. It's about honor. My grandfather died believing he'd been cheated. My father spent his entire life searching for Thomas King, and now I'm here to close the circle. The money is secondary. What matters is that it's returned to its rightful owners. Sirens. Faint but unmistakable. Walter's 911 call had gone through after all the open line recording, everything. Relief flooded through him, making him almost dizzy. Carson heard them too. His voice became urgent. Mr. Briggs, you have about 3 minutes before this becomes very complicated for everyone. Tell us where the money is and we disappear. Refuse and things get messy. Police investigations, questions about your connection to Thomas King scrutiny you don't want or need. Think about your family, your daughter in Atlanta, your son in Germany. Do you really want to drag them into this? The threat was subtle but clear. Walter's grip on the Colt tightened. You stay away from my family. Then give us what we came for. The sirens were louder now, maybe 2 minutes out. Walter could hear the men outside moving car doors opening. They were preparing to leave, but Carson's voice remained steady, patient. This isn't over, Mr. Briggs. We know where you live. We know your routines. Every trip to town, every doctor's appointment, every visit from your daughter. We'll be watching. And one day when you least expect it, we'll be back. Unless you decide right now to end this. The money for your peace. Simple transaction. Walter thought about the letters in his pocket. Margaret King's terrified words, her plea for her husband to give back what he'd taken. History repeating itself, the same threats echoing across 7 decades. But Thomas King had run rather than give in. He'd buried the money and disappeared, protecting his family the only way he knew how. Thomas King made his choice, Walter said, and I'm making mine. Whatever he took from your grandfather, he had his reasons, and those reasons died with him. There was a long silence. Then Carson spoke, his voice now distant, already moving away. So be it, Mr. Briggs. You've chosen your side in a very old war. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. Walter heard vehicles starting gravel crunching under tires. By the time he struggled to his feet and made it to the window, the SUV and pickup were already turning onto the county road, disappearing into the tree line just as the first sheriff's cruiser came into view from the opposite direction. Deputy Mike Harrison was someone Walter knew had known since Mike was a kid, catching crawdads in the creek that ran along the property line. He took in the broken back door, the holes in the ceiling, the Colt in Walter's shaking hand, and his young face went serious. Mr. Briggs, I'm going to need you to put the weapon down. Okay, nice and slow. Walter complied, setting the old gun on the kitchen counter. His legs were shaking so badly he had to grab the edge of the sink to stay upright. You hurt? Mike asked, one hand on his own service weapon, but not drawing it. No, I'm okay. Just shook up. Dispatch said something about you finding something buried, and then people showing up. Walter nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Behind the shed, there's a box. Been buried there since the 50s, near as I can tell. Has to do with Martha's great-uncle Thomas King. He was in Korea. Mike relaxed slightly. And those men who just left. Said they were here to collect some kind of debt from back then. They broke in when I wouldn't let them in. More sirens now. 2 more cruisers pulled up, and soon Walter's kitchen was full of uniforms. Sheriff Jim Dalton himself showed up within 20 minutes, his craggy face grim as Mike filled him in. Walter, Jim said, pulling up a chair across from where Walter sat at his kitchen table looking every one of his 72 years. You want to tell me what this is really about? So Walter told him. About the mound that had grown over the years, about his decision to dig about the box and its contents. He pulled the letters from his pocket, watching Jim's eyebrows climb as he read them. And you have no idea who these men were, this David Carson? Walter shook his head. Never seen them before. But Carson said his grandfather had business with Thomas King in Korea. Something about payment for services. Jim was quiet for a moment, thinking. Korea was a nasty war. A lot of things happened over there that never made it into the official records. Black market intelligence operations, things that would make your hair curl. If Thomas King was mixed up in something like that. He was just a sergeant, Walter said. But even as he said it, he wondered. What kind of sergeant came home with $300,000 in 1953 money? I'll need to see this box, Jim said. They walked out together. Walter moving slowly, his knee on fire after the morning's exertions. The mound looked different now, and the full morning sun violated its secret exposed. Jim crouched beside it, studying the box with professional interest. We'll need to take this in as evidence, he said. The gun especially, and the money, if there really is any. Though after 70 years, I'm not sure what kind of case we're looking at. The threatening letters are interesting, but everyone involved is probably long dead. Except for their descendants, Walter said quietly. Jim looked up at him sharply. You think they'll be back? Carson pretty much promised it. Jim stood dusting off his hands. We'll have a unit drive by regularly, and I'll do some digging, see if I can find out anything about this Carson family. In the meantime, you might want to consider staying somewhere else for a while. Your daughters maybe... Walter almost laughed. Run away from his own home. Let these thugs drive him off his own land. But then he thought about Thomas King, who had run, who had buried his secrets and disappeared rather than face whatever Carson's grandfather represented. Maybe running wasn't cowardice. Maybe sometimes it was the only sane choice. I'll think about it, he told Jim. The sheriff's department spent the rest of the morning processing the scene. Photographs, measurements, evidence bags. They took the box and its contents, giving Walter a receipt that seemed absurdly mundane for something that had upended his life. They boarded up his broken back door and told him to get it fixed as soon as possible. By noon, everyone was gone except Mike Harrison, who'd volunteered to stay until Walter could arrange repairs. They sat on the front porch drinking coffee and not saying much. The farm looked exactly as it had yesterday, peaceful and isolated, but Walter knew it would never feel the same. Every shadow could hide a watcher. Every car on the county road could be them returning. My granddad knew Thomas King, Mike said suddenly. Walter looked at him in surprise. He did. Well, knew of him anyway. Granddad was sheriff back then in the 50s. He used to tell this story about a sergeant who came back from Korea and caused all kinds of whispers. Said the man had gotten mixed up with intelligence type CIA maybe, or whatever they called it back then. Did things that weren't exactly legal but weren't exactly illegal either, if you know what I mean. What kind of things? Mike shrugged. Granddad never said exactly, but he did say that one day some men in suits came looking for this sergeant. Government types, but not the kind that show badges. They asked a lot of questions, made a lot of threats. Then the sergeant disappeared and the men in suits left, and that was that. But these men today weren't government, Walter said. No, Mike agreed. But in those days in that war, the line between government and private interests got pretty blurry. A lot of money to be made in war, and not all of it legal. If Thomas King was facilitating something moving money or goods or information, and he decided to keep what wasn't his, They'd never stop looking for him. Or it, Mike said. $300,000 in 1953. That's millions today. That's worth holding a grudge over. Walter thought about the letters again. Margaret King's terror palpable, even after 70 years. He had a family, a wife and son. Maybe that's why he ran. Maybe he figured they'd be safe if he wasn't around. But he came back here to bury the money. Mike nodded slowly. Family land. Somewhere he knew it would be safe. Maybe he planned to come back for it someday, when things cooled down. But he never did. No. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Whether he couldn't or just chose not to. They sat in silence for a while, watching the shadows grow longer as afternoon approached. Finally, Mike stood to leave. Lock your doors tonight, Mr. Briggs, and keep your phone handy. Any little thing seems off, you call us right away. Walter nodded, but he knew locks wouldn't keep out the kind of trouble that was coming. These men had waited 70 years. They could wait a little longer, pick their moment. Unless... Mike, he called as the deputy was getting into his cruiser. What happened to them Margaret King and the boy? Mike shrugged. I could check. Might be records somewhere. I'd appreciate it. After Mike left, Walter stood in his kitchen looking at the boarded-up door. The house felt different, now violated. Even the familiar creaks and settling sounds seemed ominous. He thought about Jim's suggestion to stay with Sarah, but immediately dismissed it. He wouldn't bring this danger to her door. He spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone, first with a contractor about the door, then with Sarah trying to sound normal as she chattered about her work, her husband's promotion, the kids' school activities. When she asked how he was, he said fine, just fine, the lie sitting heavy on his tongue. As evening approached, Walter found himself back at the spot where the box had been buried. The hole looked like a wound in the earth, dark and wrong. He'd lived above this secret for years, walked over it thousands of times, never knowing. Now that it was gone, the absence felt larger than the thing itself had been. He thought about Thomas King, trying to imagine the man. A soldier who'd done things in war that followed him home. A husband and father who'd chosen to disappear rather than put his family at risk. How long had he run? How far had he spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for Carson's grandfather to find him? The sun was setting, painting the sky the color of old blood. Walter went inside, locked all the doors, and checked them twice. He made himself a simple dinner but couldn't eat it. Every sound made him jump. Every shadow at the window could be someone watching. Around 9 o'clock his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Briggs. It was Carson's voice, smooth as aged whiskey. I hope I'm not disturbing your evening. What do you want? Simply to offer you another chance. My associates were quite upset about this morning's dramatics. They wanted to handle things more directly, but I convinced them to let me try once more. You're an old man, Mr. Briggs. You shouldn't have to spend your remaining years afraid. I'm not afraid of you. Carson chuckled. Of course not. You're a veteran, a brave man, but bravery and stupidity are often confused. Tell me, have you looked into what happened to Thomas King? He disappeared. Yes, he did. But do you know when August 15th, 1953? 4 months after he came home from Korea. 4 months of running, hiding, looking over his shoulder. And then one day he simply vanished. His car was found at the bottom of a ravine in Tennessee. No body, of course. Never was a body. But his wife never looked for him, did she? She knew he was gone. Walter's mouth had gone dry. You're saying your grandfather killed him. I'm saying Thomas King made a choice, and it had consequences, just as you're making a choice now. But you have something he didn't have the opportunity to end this cleanly. The money for your piece. My final offer. The police have the box. Everything in it. We both know that's not true. You had hours alone with it before calling anyone. You're a smart man, Mr. Briggs. You would have hidden the money somewhere else, somewhere safe. Walter almost laughed. If only Carson knew the truth that there had been no money, just the letters and the gun and the uniform. Either Thomas King had hidden it somewhere else, or someone had found it years ago, or it had never been there at all. There's no money, Walter said. Whatever your grandfather was owed, it's gone. There was a long silence. When Carson spoke again, his voice was winter cold. "Then you've made your choice. Good night, Mr. Briggs. Sleep well, while you can." The line went dead. Walter stood holding the phone, his hand trembling slightly. Outside wind moved through the trees, and every rustling leaf sounded like footsteps. He walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, patient and inexorable trouble was gathering like storm clouds. He thought about Thomas King again, about those 4 months between his return from Korea and his disappearance. 4 months of this jumping at shadows, waiting for the knock at the door, the footsteps in the night. Walter was 72 years old. He didn't have the energy for that kind of fear. But he was also stubborn, a trait Martha had both loved and hated. These men thought they could intimidate him into giving them something he didn't have. They thought age made him weak, vulnerable. Maybe they were right, but weakness and surrender weren't the same thing. Walter walked to his bedroom, where Martha's picture still sat on the nightstand. She was young in the photo taken just after they'd married, her smile bright and fearless. She'd been the brave one in their marriage, the one who'd faced her cancer with grace and humor while he'd raged uselessly against it. "What would you do, Martha?" he asked the picture. But he already knew. Martha would have stood her ground. She would have protected what was hers. And she would have found a way to turn the tables on anyone who threatened her home. The realization came slowly, like dawn breaking. Carson and his men thought the money was hidden somewhere. They'd watch and wait for Walter to lead them to it. But what if Walter could use that against them? What if the absence of something could be turned into a weapon? He reached for the phone again, this time dialing Pete Hawkins. His neighbor answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. "Pete, it's Walter. Sorry to call so late." "Walter. Everything okay?" "Actually, no. I need your help with something. Can you come by tomorrow morning early?" "Sure, of course. What's going on?" "I'll explain tomorrow. Just bring your metal detector, will you? The good one." Pete was quiet for a moment. "This about that mound behind your shed?" "In a way, yes." "All right, I'll be there at 7. After hanging up, Walter made one more call, this one to his son Michael, in Germany. It would be early morning there, but Michael had always been an early riser. His son answered on the first ring, immediately alert. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just needed to hear your voice." "At this hour?" "Come on, Dad. Talk to me." So Walter did. He told Michael everything from the discovery of the box to Carson's threats. His son listened without interrupting his breathing, the only sound across the thousands of miles between them. "I can be there in 24 hours, Michael said when Walter finished. "No, you have your duty, your career." "Screw my career. You're my father." The fierce protectiveness in Michael's voice made Walter's eyes burn with unexpected tears. "I know, son, but I'm handling it. The police are involved. I just wanted you to know, in case." "Don't talk like that." "I'm 72 years old, Michael. We both know I don't have forever. I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you. Your mother would be so proud. And if something happens, nothing's going to happen." "If something happens," Walter continued firmly, "know that I love you. You and Sarah both. You've been good children, better than I deserved." They talked for a few more minutes, Michael extracting a promise that Walter would call him every day until this was resolved. After they hung up, Walter felt oddly at peace. He'd said what needed saying. Now he could focus on what came next. He didn't sleep much that night, but the sleeplessness wasn't from fear. It was from planning. By dawn, he had a clear idea of what he needed to do. Thomas King had run, but Walter was too old and too tired to run. Instead, he would stand and fight using the only weapons he had: time, patience, and the fact that Carson's men were looking for something that didn't exist. Pete Hawkins arrived at 6:45 the next morning, his metal detector in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. He took one look at Walter's face and whistled low. "You look like hell, Walter. When's the last time you slept?" "Sleep's overrated," Walter said, accepting the offered coffee gratefully. "Thanks for coming." Pete glanced at the boarded-up back door, the disturbed earth behind the shed. "Mike Harrison stopped by my place last night. Told me you had some trouble. Said it had to do with that mound we always joked about." "It's complicated," Walter said. "But I need your help with something. I need you to help me search the property." "For what?" Walter had thought about this carefully. "The men who came yesterday think there's money hidden somewhere on the land. They think I found it and hid it again. They're wrong, but they won't believe that. So we're going to search, publicly, obviously. Let them see us looking." Pete's eyes narrowed. "You want them to think you're still searching for it?" "Exactly. If they believe I don't have it yet, maybe they'll wait. Watch. Give the police time to figure out who they are." It was a thin plan built on assumptions and hope, but it was all Walter had. Pete studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, where do we start?" They began near the shed, working outward in expanding circles. The metal detector beeped occasionally, finding old nails, a horseshoe, the remains of what might have been an old fence line. Normal farm detritus. Walter made a show of digging up each find, examining it carefully before tossing it aside. He knew they were being watched. He couldn't see anyone, but the feeling was there, a pressure between his shoulder blades like a scope's crosshairs. Good. Let them watch. Let them see an old man desperately searching for something that wasn't there. Around 9 o'clock, Jim Dalton's cruiser pulled up. The sheriff got out slowly, his face grim. "Morning, Walter. Pete." He looked at the metal detector, the various holes they'd dug. "What's going on here?" "Looking for more of whatever Thomas King might have buried," Walter said loudly, in case anyone was listening. "Figure if he buried one box, might have buried more." Jim's eyes narrowed slightly, understanding passing between them. "Find anything?" "Not yet, but the farm's 40 acres. Could take weeks to search it all." "I see." Jim walked closer, lowering his voice. "Mike Harrison did some digging into the King family last night. Thought you might want to know what he found." Walter's pulse quickened, but he kept his face neutral. "Oh." Margaret King Thomas's wife, she moved to California in May of 1953. Took their son Bobby with her, changed their names to Martin. She remarried in 1955, a dentist from Sacramento. Lived a quiet life, died in 1998. And the son, Robert Martin, formerly Bobby King, became a teacher. High school history, if you can believe that. Retired, now lives in Oregon. Mike found a phone number if you want it. Walter did want it desperately, but not now. Not with unknown eyes watching. "Maybe later," he said casually. "Right now Pete and I have work to do." Jim nodded, understanding. "I'll have units drive by regularly. You see anything unusual, you call immediately." After Jim left, Walter and Pete continued their search. The sun climbed higher, the day growing warm for early spring. They found a Depression-era glass bottle that Pete claimed for his collection, some rusted farm equipment, and dozens of square nails from some long-demolished structure. But no more boxes, no money, nothing that would satisfy the watchers. Around noon, they took a break sitting on the porch with sandwiches Walter had thrown together. Pete kept glancing at Walter with concern. "You really think they're out there watching?" "I know they are," Walter said. "Carson won't give up. His family's been waiting 70 years for this." "But if there's no money," he doesn't believe that, won't believe it. In his mind, Thomas King stole from his grandfather, and that money has to be somewhere. Pete was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "You know, my daddy used to tell stories about the Korean War. Said it was a dirty business, lots of dealing under the table. Black market stuff, intelligence operations that nobody talked about. If Thomas King was mixed up in that..." "He was just a sergeant," Walter said, the same protest he'd made before. "Maybe. Or maybe that was just his cover. Daddy said there were soldiers over there who weren't really soldiers, if you know what I mean. CIA types using the army as a front for other operations." Walter thought about the $300,000 Carson had mentioned. That was serious money in 1953, enough to set up a man for life. What kind of services earned that kind of payment? They went back to searching after lunch, moving into the eastern section of the property where an old tobacco barn had once stood. The metal detector went crazy near the foundation, but it was just old metal roofing that had been buried when the structure was demolished. Still, Walter made a production of excavating it, letting the watchers see his growing frustration. As the afternoon wore on, something strange happened. Cars began driving by on the county road, slowing as they passed. Word had gotten out the rural grapevine, working its mysterious magic. By 3 o'clock, Walter counted 6 different vehicles that had made multiple passes. "Vultures," Pete muttered, watching a pickup truck slow to nearly a stop before moving on. Everybody loves a treasure hunt, but Walter wondered if all the observers were innocent curiosity seekers. Any one of those vehicles could be Carson's men keeping watch, waiting for him to reveal the location of the non-existent money. Around 4 o'clock, Walter's phone rang. Sarah. Dad, what's going on? I just got a call from Michael saying you're in some kind of trouble. Walter silently cursed his son's protective instincts. It's nothing, sweetheart. Just some confusion about something I found on the property. Michael said men broke into your house. He said they threatened you. The police are handling it. Dad. Sarah's voice took on the tone she'd inherited from her mother, the one that brooked no argument. I'm coming down there. No. The word came out sharper than Walter intended. No, Sarah. I don't want you here right now. There was hurt silence on the other end. Walter closed his eyes, hating himself for it, but the last thing he wanted was his daughter in danger. Dad, you're scaring me. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm fine, really. The sheriff's department is keeping an eye on things. I just need a few days to sort this out, and then everything will be back to normal. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. After they hung up, Pete looked at him with sympathy. Hard to keep them from worrying. I'd rather have her worried and safe in Atlanta than here and in danger. They continued searching until dusk, covering nearly 5 acres, without finding anything significant. As Pete packed up his metal detector, he paused. You know, Walter, there's something else you might want to consider. What's that? What if Thomas King never buried the money here at all? What if that box was a decoy meant to make people think the money was here when it was really somewhere else? Walter had thought the same thing, but hearing it from Pete made it seem more real. Then I'm searching for something that was never here to begin with. Which means those men watching you are wasting their time too. After Pete left, Walter stood in his kitchen looking out at the gathering darkness. The boarded-up door was a constant reminder of yesterday's violence, but he deliberately left it unrepaired. Let the watchers see the damage, be reminded that the police were involved now. His phone rang. Unknown number. Walter let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Mr. Briggs, this is David Carson. I saw your little performance today with the metal detector. Very convincing, but we both know you already have what we're looking for. This game you're playing is pointless and potentially dangerous. Call me back. Let's end this like civilized men. Walter deleted the message without responding. Let Carson stew in his uncertainty. The longer he could keep them guessing, the more time the police had to investigate. He made himself a simple dinner, eating mechanically without tasting. His body was exhausted, but his mind was racing, turning over possibilities like a gambler shuffling cards. Where would Thomas King have hidden the money, if not here? Did he even have it when he disappeared? Or had Carson's grandfather already recovered it, and this was all about something else entirely? Around 8 o'clock, there was a knock at his door. Walter's hand went to the Colt he'd started carrying, a replacement from his own collection since the police had the one from the box. Through the peephole, he saw Mike Harrison in uniform. It's Mike, Mr. Briggs. Can I come in? Walter opened the door, relief flooding through him. Mike entered, looking around carefully before closing the door behind him. Sheriff wanted me to check on you. Also, I have some information you might find interesting. They sat at the kitchen table, Mike pulling out a small notebook. I did some more digging into Thomas King and what happened in 1953. Found something interesting in the old newspaper archives. 2 weeks before King disappeared, there was a robbery at the Farmers and Merchants Bank in town. Night job, very professional. They got into the vault, somehow cleaned it out. Never caught who did it. Walter frowned. You think Thomas King robbed a bank? The timing's interesting, isn't it? And here's the really interesting part. The bank president at the time was Harold Carson, David Carson's grandfather. Walter felt like the floor had tilted beneath him. Carson owned the bank. Part owner, but yeah. And according to the old reports, he was particularly upset about the robbery. Offered a huge reward for information, hired private investigators, really went all out trying to find who did it. So maybe this isn't about money from Korea at all. Mike shrugged. Or maybe it's about both. Maybe Thomas King was supposed to deposit that Korean money in Carson's bank, and instead he robbed the bank and took off with everything. It was a theory that made a certain sense. It would explain Carson's family's obsession with finding King, their certainty that money was hidden somewhere. There's more, Mike continued. I found the report on King's car being found in that ravine in Tennessee. The investigator noted something odd. There were no skid marks, no sign of trying to stop, like the car was deliberately driven off the edge. Or pushed, Walter said quietly. That too. But here's the thing, they never found a body. Searched for weeks, brought in dogs, everything. The car was empty except for some clothes and a suitcase. So Thomas King might have staged his own death. It's possible. Wouldn't be the first time someone disappeared that way. After Mike left, Walter sat in the darkness of his living room, not bothering with lights. If Thomas King had faked his death, where had he gone? Had he taken the money with him, or had he hidden it somewhere, planning to come back for it someday? The phone rang again. This time it was a number he recognized, Jim Dalton. Walter, you need to know something. We ran David Carson through the system. He's got a record. Nothing recent, but in his younger days he had some arrests for extortion, assault, conspiracy. Did 5 years in federal prison in the 90s. Since then he's been clean, at least on paper. Runs a private security firm now, all legitimate as far as we can tell. But a man like that doesn't forget old grudges. And he's got the resources and connections to cause real problems. I want to put a deputy on your property. That'll just make them more careful, Walter argued. Right now, they think I'm just an old man alone. If you put security on me, they'll know I'm taking this seriously. You are taking it seriously. Yes, but I don't want them to know that. I need them to think I'm vulnerable, that they can wait me out. Jim sighed. It's your call, Walter, but I don't like it. After they hung up, Walter made his own call to the number Jim had given him earlier. It rang 4 times before a cautious voice answered. Hello? Is this Robert Martin, formerly Bobby King? There was a long pause. Who is this? My name is Walter Briggs. I own the farm in Georgia where your father grew up. I found something he buried here a long time ago, and now some men are causing trouble over it. I was hoping you might be able to help me understand what happened. Another pause, longer this time. When Robert spoke again, his voice was heavy with old pain. I was 5 years old when my father disappeared. I barely remember him. But your mother must have told you things. My mother spent her whole life trying to forget Thomas King existed. She burned every picture, every letter, forbade me from ever trying to find out what happened to him, said he was dead to us, and that was that. But you did try to find out. A soft laugh. You're perceptive, Mr. Briggs. Yes, when I got older, I did some research. Found out about his service in Korea, his discharge, the months we spent running before he vanished. But I never found out why. The men bothering me claim your father owed their family money. A lot of money. That doesn't surprise me. Near the end, before he left, I remember Mom crying all the time. Men coming to the house at all hours. Dad cleaning his gun at the kitchen table with this look on his face like he was already dead, just waiting for his body to catch up. Walter's heart ached for the boy that had been watching his family disintegrate without understanding why. I'm sorry to bring all this up. Don't be. I'm 76 years old, Mr. Briggs. I've made my peace with it. But can I give you some advice? Please. Whatever my father was involved in, it destroyed him. Don't let it destroy you too. If these men want money and you have it, give it to them. No amount of money is worth what my family went through. What if I don't have it? Robert was quiet for a moment. Then God help you, because they'll never believe that. They'll never stop looking, just like my mother never stopped looking over her shoulder, even 40 years later, even dying in a hospital bed in Sacramento. Her last words were, "Is he coming?" I thought she meant my father. Now I wonder if she meant someone else entirely. After they hung up, Walter stood at his window looking out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, patient and watchful, Carson's men were waiting. They believed he had their money, and nothing he could say or do would convince them otherwise. He thought about Robert Martin's advice about giving them what they wanted. But how could he give them something that didn't exist? The money, if it had ever been in that box, was long gone. Taken by Thomas King when he vanished, or found by someone else years ago, or maybe never there at all. The Colt sat heavy in his pocket, 5 rounds in the cylinder, a handful more in a box in his bedroom drawer. Not much of a defense against determined men with resources and patience. But it was something. The house creaked around him, settling into night. Every sound could be footsteps. Every shadow could hide a threat. This was what Thomas King had lived with for 4 months before he disappeared. This constant fear, this waiting for violence that might come at any moment. Walter understood now why King had run. It wasn't cowardice, it was exhaustion. The human mind could only maintain that level of alertness for so long before it broke. And King had had a family to think about, a wife and young son who were suffering because of his choices. But Walter was alone. Martha was gone. His children were safe in their distant lives. He had only himself to worry about, and at 72 he'd already lived longer than he'd ever expected. If this was how it ended, at least it would be on his own land, in his own home, standing his ground. The phone rang again. Walter almost didn't answer it, but the caller ID showed Pete Hawkins. "Walter, you need to look outside, right now." Walter moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed them small lights moving through his fields. Flashlights. At least 4 of them spreading out across his property. "I see them," he said quietly. "I'm calling the sheriff." "No, wait." Walter watched the lights moving, systematically searching. "Let them look. They won't find anything." "Walter, this is trespassing at minimum, probably more. You can't just let them—" "I can and I will. They need to see for themselves that there's nothing here. Maybe then they'll believe it." But even as he said it, Walter knew it was wishful thinking. Men who'd waited 70 years for satisfaction wouldn't give up after one night of searching. This was just the beginning. He settled into his chair by the window, the Colt in his lap, and watched the lights move through his fields like fireflies. They searched for 3 hours, covering the same ground he and Pete had covered that day and more. Finally, around midnight, the lights converged near the property line and disappeared. Walter's phone rang immediately. "Carson." "We didn't find anything," Carson said without preamble. "But then you knew we wouldn't, didn't you?" "You've already moved it." "There's nothing to move. I've told you the truth." "The truth?" Carson laughed bitterly. "Do you know what your friend Thomas King's truth cost my family? My grandfather died broken and bitter, convinced he'd been betrayed by a man he'd trusted. My father spent his entire inheritance trying to find King-hiring investigators chasing shadows. And now here I am, 3rd generation, still trying to recover what was stolen from us." "Maybe it was never stolen. Maybe your grandfather lied about the money." The silence on the other end was dangerous. When Carson spoke again, his voice was ice. "My grandfather was many things, Mr. Briggs, but he was not a liar. The money existed. King took it, and you have it. This is your last chance to do the right thing. Or what you'll do to me, what your grandfather did to Thomas King." "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. Your grandfather killed Thomas King, or had him killed, and now you're here 70 years later making the same threats to another old man who doesn't have what you want." "You're wrong about one thing," Carson said. "You do have what I want. You just don't know it yet. But you will, soon." The line went dead. Walter sat in the darkness, wondering what Carson meant. What didn't he know? What was he missing? He thought about the box, about its contents. The uniform, the gun, the letters. Nothing valuable except for the supposed money. Unless... Walter stood so quickly his knee nearly gave out. The letters. He'd given them to Jim Dalton, but he remembered them clearly. 3 letters from Margaret, growing increasingly desperate. 1 threatening letter with no signature. But there had been other papers in the box, things he'd barely glanced at in his shock. Old documents he'd assumed were military papers. What if one of those documents was what Carson really wanted? What if the money was secondary to something else Thomas King had taken? But the box was in evidence now, its contents cataloged and filed away. Whatever secrets it held were beyond Walter's reach. All he could do was wait and see what Carson's next move would be. He finally went to bed around 2 in the morning, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those lights moving through his field, searching for something that might not exist, or might be right under their noses, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone clever enough to see it. The dawn came gray and cold, finding Walter still in his chair by the window. His joints had locked up during the night, and it took him several painful minutes to work feeling back into his legs. He was making coffee, when Jim Dalton's cruiser pulled up, the sheriff looking as tired as Walter felt. "Rough night?" Jim asked, taking in Walter's appearance. "You could say that. Carson's men searched my property last night. I watched them do it." Jim's face darkened. "And you didn't call us. What would you have done? Arrested them for trespassing? That would just delay things, make them more careful." Walter poured 2 cups of coffee, his hands only slightly unsteady. "They needed to search to see for themselves. There's nothing here." "Walter, I've been doing some thinking," Jim said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "About those documents in the box. We cataloged everything, but I'll be honest, we didn't examine them closely. Old military papers, we figured. But what if there's something else?" "I was thinking the same thing last night." Jim pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos. "I had Mike photograph everything before we logged it into evidence. Look at this." He showed Walter a photo of a yellowed document, the writing faded but still legible. It appeared to be some kind of agreement or contract written in English and what looked like Korean. At the bottom were 3 signatures: Thomas King, Harold Carson, and a third name Walter couldn't make out. "What is it?" Walter asked. "Near as we can tell, it's a partnership agreement. Something about import-export licenses, trade routes, government contracts, the kind of thing that would have been worth a fortune in post-war Korea." Walter studied the photo more closely. The date was February 1953, just months before Thomas King disappeared. So they were business partners. Looks like it, which makes the whole theft angle more complicated. You can't steal from yourself, unless one partner cut the other out. Jim nodded. "That's what I'm thinking. Maybe King and Carson were running some kind of operation together, and King decided he wanted all the profits instead of just his share. Or maybe Carson tried to cut King out, and King took what he felt he was owed." They sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the possibilities. After 70 years, the truth was buried as deep as that box had been, maybe deeper. "There's something else," Jim said, pulling up another photo. "This was tucked into the lining of the uniform jacket. Almost missed it." It was a photograph, black and white, showing 3 men in military fatigues standing in front of what looked like a warehouse. Walter recognized Thomas King from other photos he'd seen. The second man, even young and smooth-faced, was clearly Harold Carson, the same sharp features that David Carson had inherited. The third man was Asian, wearing the insignia of the South Korean Army. "Partners," Walter said quietly. They really were partners. Until something went wrong. The question is what? Before Jim could say more, Walter's phone rang. Sarah. "Dad, I'm in the car. I'll be there in 2 hours. Sarah, no, I told you." "I don't care what you told me. You're my father and you're in trouble. I'm coming." She hung up before he could protest further. Walter looked at Jim helplessly. "I'll have a unit meet her when she gets to town," Jim said. "Escort her here safely." "This is exactly what I didn't want. She's your daughter, Walter. She's got a right to be here." After Jim left, Walter tried to distract himself with routine shower-shave breakfast, but his mind kept circling back to that photograph. 3 men who'd been partners in something during the Korean War. One disappeared, one died bitter and obsessed, and one was never identified. What had they been involved in, and what had torn them apart? Pete Hawkins stopped by around 9, ostensibly to retrieve his metal detector, but really to check on Walter. "Saw the lights last night," Pete said, "watching them from my place. Must have been a dozen men out there. Only 4 or 5, but they were thorough." "Find anything?" "Nothing to find." Pete studied him carefully. "You look like hell, Walter. When's the last time you ate a real meal?" Walter couldn't remember. The last few days had blurred together into one long stretch of tension and sleeplessness. "Come on," Pete said. "Louise made extra breakfast. You're coming to eat whether you like it or not." Walter wanted to refuse, but Pete was already steering him toward the door. The short walk to Pete's truck felt exposed, vulnerable. He found himself scanning the tree line looking for watchers. Pete's house was only a quarter-mile down the road, a tidy rancher that Louise kept immaculate. She took one look at Walter and immediately set about mothering him, pushing plates of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy in front of him until he had no choice but to eat. "This business with those men," Louise said, refreshing his coffee for the 3rd time. "It's got the whole county talking. Mary Stevens says she saw strange cars up and down all the back roads yesterday. Tom Murphy says someone was asking questions about you at the hardware store. What kind of questions? Walter asked. How long you'd lived here, whether you had money troubles, who your friends were. Tom told them to mind their own business, but still, it's unsettling. It was more than unsettling. Carson was gathering intelligence, learning everything he could about Walter's life, looking for leverage. The thought of these strangers dissecting his existence made Walter's skin crawl. You could stay here, Pete offered quietly. We've got the guest room. I appreciate that, but no. I won't be driven from my home. Stubborn fool, Louise muttered, but her eyes were kind. When Walter returned home, escorted by Pete, who insisted on checking the house first, he found a package on his porch. No delivery truck had come while he was gone, which meant it had been hand-delivered. The box was small and marked except for his name written in neat block letters. Don't touch it, Pete said immediately. Could be dangerous. But Walter somehow knew it wasn't. This was a message, not an attack. He picked up the box, carefully feeling its weight. Something shifted inside metallic. Inside the house, with Pete watching nervously, Walter opened the package. Nested in tissue paper was a military medal, a bronze star tarnished with age. There was a note underneath, "Your friend earned this in Korea. He earned other things too, some above board, some not. The question you should be asking isn't where the money is, but where the third man went. Find Park Sung-ho, you find your answers." DC. Who's Park Sung-ho? Pete asked, reading over Walter's shoulder. I think he was the third man in the photograph. The Korean soldier who was partners with King and Carson. And Carson wants you to find him. Why? Walter turned the medal over in his hands, thinking. Maybe because Park knows where the money really is. Or maybe because Park was the one who ended up with it. His phone rang. Sarah again. Dad, I'm about 20 minutes out. There's a sheriff's car behind me. Did you arrange that? Jim Dalton did, just a precaution. What aren't you telling me? Everything Walter thought but said, we'll talk when you get here. While waiting for Sarah, Walter searched online for Park Sung-ho, but the name was too common, the time frame too distant. He found references to dozens of Park Sung-hos, but none that clearly connected to the Korean War or to Thomas King. Then he remembered Robert Martin Thomas King's son. He might know something about his father's associates. Walter found the number and dialed. Mr. Briggs, Robert answered, his voice wary. I wasn't expecting to hear from you again. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you something. Does the name Park Sung-ho mean anything to you? There was a long silence. When Robert spoke again, his voice was strange, distant. Where did you hear that name? It's complicated, but I think he was involved with your father in Korea. Park Sung-ho, Robert said slowly, as if tasting the name. I haven't heard that name in 50 years. My mother mentioned him once when she was very ill near the end. She was delirious with fever, talking about the past. She said something about Uncle Park, how he'd tried to help, how he'd warned them to run. Uncle Park. That's what she called him. But when I asked her about it later after she recovered, she claimed not to know what I was talking about. Got angry when I pushed. Do you know if he's still alive, where he might be? Mr. Briggs? If Park Sung-ho is still alive, he'd be in his 90s, and if he had any sense, he'd have stayed far away from anything to do with my father and the Carsons. After they hung up, Walter sat staring at the bronze star. Carson had given him a clue. But why? What game was he playing? Sarah arrived in a whirlwind of concern and determination, her husband David trailing behind, looking uncomfortable. Walter had always liked David, a quiet accountant who adored Sarah and stayed out of family drama. But now Walter wished he'd stayed in Atlanta safe from whatever was coming. Dad, you look terrible, Sarah said, hugging him fiercely. And what happened to your door? It's being fixed. Had a little incident with some unwanted visitors. Mike Harrison told us, David said quietly. On the drive in. He explained about the box and the men looking for money. Walter looked at his daughter, seeing Martha in the set of her jaw, the determination in her eyes. You shouldn't have come. That's too bad because I'm here, and I'm not leaving until this is resolved. They spent the next hour going over everything Walter explaining about Thomas King, the Carsons, the mysterious money that may or may not exist. Sarah listened with the intensity she brought to her work as a prosecutor, asking pointed questions, making connections Walter hadn't seen. This partnership agreement, she said, studying the photo on Jim's phone that he'd forwarded to Walter. It's not just about import-export. Look at this clause here. It mentions special governmental considerations and liaison services. That's intelligence speak. How do you know that? I prosecuted a case 2 years ago involving defense contractors and classified information. This kind of language is all over those documents. Your Thomas King wasn't just a soldier. He was involved in intelligence operations. That changed things. Intelligence operations meant government connections, classified information, the kind of secrets that didn't have statutes of limitations. So maybe the money wasn't the real issue, David said, surprising them all by speaking up. Maybe King took something else. Documents, intelligence, something that compromised Carson or this Park fellow. Before anyone could respond, Walter's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was an address in Atlanta followed by Park Sung-ho, 3 p.m. today, come alone. Sarah saw the message over his shoulder. Absolutely not. You're not going anywhere alone. It's from Carson. He wants me to meet Park. It's a trap? Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to end this. They argued for the next 20 minutes, Sarah adamant that Walter shouldn't go. Walter equally determined that he had to. Finally, David offered a compromise. I'll go with him, he said quietly. Not inside, but I'll wait in the car. If Walter doesn't come out in an hour, I call the police. David, no, Sarah started, but her husband held up his hand. Walter's right. This needs to end. And maybe this Park person has answers that will end it. Sarah wanted to argue more, but Walter could see her wrestling with her prosecutor's instincts. Sometimes the only way forward was through risk. Fine, she said finally. But you're taking my gun. Walter almost laughed. You brought a gun. I'm a prosecutor, Dad. I've put away dangerous people. Of course I have a gun. The drive to Atlanta took 2 hours, David behind the wheel of his sedan while Walter navigated. They didn't talk much, both lost in their own thoughts. The address led them to a modest apartment complex in Duluth, the kind of place that catered to elderly residents on fixed incomes. 1 hour, David said as Walter got out. Then I'm calling everyone, police, FBI, Sarah, everyone. Walter nodded and walked into the building. The apartment was on the 3rd floor end of the hall. He knocked, his heart hammering. The door opened to reveal an elderly Asian man, bent with age but with eyes that were sharp and clear. He studied Walter for a long moment, then stepped aside. Mr. Briggs, I've been expecting you for many years. The apartment was small but meticulously clean, decorated with Korean artwork and photographs of what must be children and grandchildren. Park Sung-ho moved slowly to a chair, gesturing for Walter to sit across from him. Carson contacted me yesterday, Park said, his English accented but precise. First time in 20 years. He said Thomas King's secret had finally surfaced. You knew Thomas King. Knew him. We were brothers in everything but blood. We fought together, bled together, did terrible things together in the name of victory and survival. Park stood with difficulty and retrieved a photo album from a shelf. He opened it to show Walter pictures of 3 young men in military settings. King, Carson, and Park himself, all looking impossibly young and serious. We ran an operation in Korea, Park continued. Officially, we were supply logistics. Unofficially, we were moving things that couldn't be moved through regular channels. Weapons to anti-communist partisans. Gold and artwork out of the combat zones. Information that could be sold to the highest bidder. You were war profiteers. Park smiled sadly. We were survivors, Mr. Briggs. The war was chaos. Everyone was grabbing what they could. We just happened to be better at it than most. What went wrong? What always goes wrong when large amounts of money are involved? Greed, betrayal. Carson wanted to expand operations, take bigger risks. Thomas wanted out. He had a wife and baby back home. And I just wanted to survive. Park turned to another page in the album showing a photograph of a younger woman and 2 children. Carson discovered that Thomas and I were planning to dissolve the partnership. We'd already moved most of the assets to safety. Carson saw this as betrayal. He threatened Thomas's family, said he'd expose our operations to the authorities unless he got his share. So Thomas ran. Not immediately. First, he tried to pay Carson off, gave him $100,000, promised more. But Carson wanted everything. He wanted the account numbers for the Swiss banks, the contacts in Hong Kong, the whole network we'd built. Swiss banks. Park smiled. You thought this was about cash buried in a box? No, Mr. Briggs. The real money was already safe in numbered accounts. Thomas buried that box as a decoy, something for Carson to fixate on while he disappeared. Walter felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. So there never was any money in the box. Oh, there was money. Maybe $50,000. Enough to make Carson believe the rest was hidden somewhere else on that farm. Thomas was clever that way. Give them something to find and they'll spend forever looking for more. But Carson's grandfather found him anyway, in Tennessee. Park's face darkened. Harold Carson was a brutal man. When he couldn't find the money, he found Thomas instead. But Thomas never gave up the account numbers. He died protecting his family's future. And you, what happened to you? I disappeared. Changed my name, came to America legally in 1961. Built a new life. The Swiss accounts, I never touched them. Blood money tends to stain everything it touches. The accounts still exist. Park stood again, moving to an old desk. From a locked drawer, he pulled out a leather journal, its pages yellow with age. Everything is here. Account numbers, passwords, contact protocols. Worth perhaps $30 million today with interest and investments. Walter stared at the journal. $30 million? More money than he could conceive of. Why are you showing me this? Because Carson will never stop looking. His family's obsession has passed from father to son like a genetic disease. The only way to end it is to give them what they want. The money. The truth. Thomas King didn't steal from Harold Carson. Harold Carson drove him to his death trying to steal from him. The money was always Thomas's and mine, legally earned through contracts and operations that, while morally questionable, were sanctioned by intelligence services on both sides. Park handed Walter the journal. Give this to Carson. Tell him the truth. The money exists, but it comes with conditions. He takes it and disappears, never to bother you or anyone else again. Or he refuses and gets nothing. Why don't you tell him yourself? Because I'm 93 years old, Mr. Briggs. I could die tomorrow. But you've been dragged into this against your will. You deserve to be the one who ends it. Walter held the journal, feeling its weight, not just physical, but the weight of decades of secrets, lies, and violence. What about Thomas King's family, his son? Don't they deserve this money? Park smiled sadly. Thomas made his choice. He chose to protect them by keeping them ignorant. Would you burden them with blood money now, after they've built honest lives? It was a fair point. Robert Martin had made his peace with his father's disappearance. Would $30 million bring him happiness, or would it bring the kind of trouble that had destroyed his father? There's one more thing, Park said, returning to his chair with obvious pain. Carson doesn't know I'm still alive. Harold told his son I died in Korea, killed in a firefight with Chinese forces. David Carson thinks you're meeting with my son or grandson. Why maintain the deception? Because dead men tell no tales, Mr. Briggs. And sometimes being dead is the only way to stay alive. Walter stood to leave the journal tucked under his arm. At the door, he turned back. Why did you really stay partners with them, King and Carson? Park was quiet for a long moment. We saved each other's lives multiple times in combat. That creates a bond that's hard to break even when you know you should. Thomas understood that. It's why he gave Carson that first $100,000, even knowing it wouldn't be enough. And it's why I'm giving you that journal now. Some debts can only be paid in full. Walter left the apartment feeling like he carried the weight of history in his hands. David was waiting in the car, relief visible on his face when Walter appeared. Well, I got what Carson wanted. Maybe. I'm not sure yet. They drove back toward Georgia, mostly in silence. Walter clutched the journal, thinking about everything Park had said. $30 million in Swiss accounts waiting all these years. Blood money from a war most people had forgotten. As they neared the farm, Walter made a decision. Drop me at the sheriff's office. Dad. Sarah was waiting there, pacing the parking lot. She ran to the car as they pulled up. I'm fine, Walter said, getting out. But I need to talk to Jim. Inside, he showed Jim Dalton the journal explaining what Park had told him. Jim whistled low, flipping through the pages. This is evidence of, I don't even know what. International banking crimes, intelligence operations. This is way above my pay grade. I'm not asking you to investigate it. I'm asking you to witness something. Walter called Carson from Jim's office, putting the phone on speaker. Mr. Briggs? Carson answered immediately. I trust your meeting was illuminating. I have what you want. The account numbers, the passwords, everything. There was silence on the other end. Then, I knew you had it. I didn't. Park Sung-ho had it. Your father lied to you. Park survived Korea. He's been living in America for 60 years with your $30 million in Swiss accounts. That's impossible. It's the truth. And here's my offer, the same one Park authorized. You get the journal with all the information. In exchange, you disappear. No more threats, no more harassment, no contact ever again. You take the money and vanish just like Thomas King did. And if I refuse, then I turn this journal over to the FBI. Let them sort out what crimes were committed and by whom. I'm betting that even after 70 years, there are still plenty of prosecutable offenses in these pages. Carson was quiet for a long time. Finally, where? The farm. Tonight. Midnight. You come alone, I'll be alone. We make the exchange and we're done. If this is a trap, it's not. I just want my life back. After hanging up, Jim shook his head. This is insane. You can't meet him alone. I won't be alone. You'll have units nearby. Walter. Jim. This is the only way. Carson needs to feel like he's won. He needs to get what his family's been seeking for 3 generations. Otherwise, this never ends. Sarah grabbed his arm. Dad, please, let the police handle this. The police can't handle 70 years of obsession. Only I can by giving him what he wants. That evening, Walter sat in his kitchen, the journal on the table in front of him. He'd made copies of key pages which Jim had secured as insurance. If something went wrong, at least there would be evidence of what this had all been about. The house felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like a battlefield. Every room held memories of the past few days. The broken door, the holes in the ceiling, the fear and anger and exhaustion. At 11:30, Walter walked out to the shed. The disturbed earth where the box had been buried was still visible, a scar on the land. He stood there holding the journal, waiting. Carson arrived exactly at midnight, his SUV rolling up the drive with its lights off. He got out slowly, hands visible, clearly, as wary of a trap as Walter was. Mr. Briggs. Mr. Carson. They stood 10 feet apart, 2 men caught in the web of their predecessors' choices. Show me, Carson said. Walter held up the journal. Account numbers for 3 Swiss banks. Passwords that Park swears still work. Protocols for accessing the funds. $30 million, give or take. How do I know it's real? You don't. But Park Sung-ho is 93 years old. He has no reason to lie now. He just wants this finished before he dies. Carson stepped closer and Walter could see his face in the moonlight. He looked tired, older than his years, worn down by the weight of inherited obsession. My whole life, Carson said quietly. I heard about the money Thomas King stole. How it destroyed my grandfather, drove my father to drink, tore our family apart. And now you're telling me it was never stolen at all. It was earned. Maybe not ethically, but legally, according to Park. Your grandfather knew that. He just wanted more than his share. Carson laughed bitterly. And he died for it. Thomas King died too. Everyone lost. Except Park. Park lost his friends, his country, his identity. He's lived under an assumed name for 60 years. That's its own kind of death. Carson held out his hand. Walter gave him the journal. Carson flipped through it, his fingers trembling slightly. 30 million, he whispered. It's yours. Take it and go. Build a new life. Let the dead rest. Carson looked up at him. Why are you doing this? You could have kept it. Because it's not mine. And because I want to sleep peacefully again. I want to work in my shop and tend my garden and not jump every time a car drives by. I want my life back." Carson tucked the journal inside his jacket. "You know I have to verify this. If these accounts don't exist, they exist. Park wouldn't lie about that. He's too close to the end to play games." Carson turned to go, then stopped. "That medal I sent you. Thomas King earned it saving my grandfather's life in Korea. Before everything went wrong, they were brothers. Maybe that's worth remembering." He walked back to his SUV and drove away, leaving Walter standing alone in the darkness. The night was quiet except for the sound of crickets and the distant bark of a dog. Walter waited until the sound of the engine faded completely, then walked back to his house. Jim Dalton's cruiser was parked in the drive. The sheriff got out, looking concerned. "It's done," Walter said. "He took it. He took it. And you think that's the end of it?" Walter looked back at the disturbed earth behind the shed. Tomorrow he would fill it in properly, maybe plant something there. Something that would grow and bloom and cover the scar. "It has to be," he said. "For all our sakes, it has to be." Jim stayed for another hour, sitting with Walter on the porch as the night deepened around them. Neither man spoke much, both processing what had just transpired. Finally, Jim stood to leave, pausing at his cruiser. "You know, I'll have to file a report about all this." "I know. It'll probably go nowhere. Too old, too complicated, too many jurisdictions. But it'll be on record." Walter nodded. That was fine. Let there be a record. Let someone someday know what had happened here. After Jim left, Walter went inside but couldn't settle. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if Carson's departure had lifted a weight from the very walls. He made himself tea and sat at the kitchen table staring at the boarded-up door that would be fixed tomorrow. Sarah and David were staying at Pete's house for the night, despite Walter's assurances that the danger had passed. He was grateful for the solitude. He needed time to think, to process everything Park Sung-ho had told him. The phone rang just after 2 in the morning. Walter's heart jumped, fearing it was Carson, that something had gone wrong with the accounts. But the number was international. "Mr. Briggs," the voice was heavily accented, speaking careful English. "My name is Kim Jae-sun. I am Park Sung-ho's son." Walter's blood ran cold. "Park doesn't have a son. He told me. He told you what he needed to tell you, but I am his son and I'm calling because my father is dead." The words hit Walter like a physical blow. "When?" 2 hours ago. He called me after you left, told me everything, then he went to sleep and didn't wake up. The doctors say it was his heart, but I think he was just ready to go." Walter sank into his chair. Park had known. Somehow he'd known his time was running out. "He left instructions for me to call you," Kim continued. "He wanted you to know something. The journal you gave Carson, it's real but incomplete. There's a second journal." "What?" "My father was many things, Mr. Briggs, but not a fool. He knew Carson might not honor your agreement, so he divided the information. The journal Carson has will give him access to one account worth about $10 million, enough to satisfy him to make him believe he's won. But the other accounts, the remaining $20 million, those require the second journal." Walter's mind was spinning. "Where is it?" "My father mailed it yesterday. To you. It should arrive in a few days. He said you would know what to do with it." "I don't understand. Why would he?" "Because Thomas King was his brother in all but blood. And Thomas King's family deserves something from all this pain. My father couldn't give it to them directly. It would have raised too many questions, brought too much danger. But you can." After Kim hung up, Walter sat in the darkness, overwhelmed by the complexity of what Park had orchestrated. Even dying, the old man had been 3 steps ahead of everyone. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. The contractor arrived early to fix the door. Sarah and David returned Sarah fussing over Walter until he had to gently tell her to stop. Pete came by with Louise bringing enough food to feed an army. Everyone wanted to hear that it was over, that Carson was gone for good. "He got what he wanted," Walter told them. "He won't be back." But privately he wondered, would $10 million be enough to satisfy 3 generations of obsession, or would Carson discover the deception and return more furious than ever? 3 days passed in tense normalcy. Walter tried to return to his routines, morning coffee on the porch, puttering in his workshop, reading in the afternoon. but he found himself constantly watching the road waiting for Carson's SUV to appear. On the fourth day, a package arrived. Federal Express requiring signature. Inside was an aged leather journal identical to the first, and a letter in shaky handwriting, Mr. Briggs. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I do not regret this. I have lived too long with too many secrets. The journal you hold contains the information Carson does not have. $20 million waiting in accounts that have been dormant for decades. This money is not mine to give, nor yours to keep. It belongs to the dead, and through them to their children. Robert Martin Thomas King's son is a good man who has lived an honest life. He does not need this burden, but perhaps his children do. Perhaps Thomas's grandchildren deserve something from their grandfather's sacrifice. I leave this to your judgment. You have been dragged into our old war against your will, but you have shown honor and courage. Thomas would have liked you. There's one more thing you should know. David Carson is not Harold Carson's only descendant. There is a daughter estranged these 30 years living in Portland. Her name is Rebecca Carson Hayes. She is a social worker dedicating her life to helping others. She knows nothing of her family's dark history. I tell you this because Carson will discover the deception eventually. When he does, he may return. If that happens, remember that he has family too. Family that might not approve of his obsessions. Thank you for allowing an old man to finally rest. Park Sung-ho. Walter read the letter 3 times, then burned it in his fireplace. The journal he hid in the same place Martha had once hidden Christmas presents, inside an old flower bin in the pantry that looked too rusty to open but actually worked perfectly. That afternoon, Mike Harrison stopped by with an update. Thought you'd want to know we've been monitoring Carson's activities. He flew to Switzerland 2 days ago. Looks like he's accessing those accounts. Good, Walter said, though he wondered what would happen when Carson realized he'd only gotten a third of what he'd expected. There's something else. We got a call from the FBI. They're interested in those documents from the box, the partnership agreement especially. Seems there's been a task force looking into Korean War profiteering for years. Cold case stuff, but still active. Are they coming here? Maybe. They said they'd be in touch, just wanted to give you a heads up. After Mike left, Walter made a decision. He couldn't sit on Park's second journal indefinitely. It was too dangerous, too heavy a burden. But he also couldn't just hand it over to Robert Martin. The man had made peace with his past. This would only reopen old wounds. He called Sarah. I need you to do something for me, as a lawyer. Dad, what's going on? I need you to set up a trust, anonymous, for Robert Martin's grandchildren, college funds maybe. Nothing huge, nothing that would raise questions. Can you do that? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Dad, where would this money come from? From something that should have been theirs all along. I can't say more than that, but I need you to trust me. Okay, I can do it. But it'll take time, and we'll need a source for the funds that won't trigger investigations. I'll handle that part. Over the next week, Walter worked with Sarah to establish the trust. He liquidated some of his own investments, about $50,000 enough to seed the fund. The real money would come later, he told her, from an inheritance he was expecting. It wasn't entirely a lie. Park had inherited the money from Thomas King in a way, and now he'd passed it to Walter. 2 weeks after giving Carson the journal, Walter was working in his shop when a car pulled up. His hand went immediately to the gun he'd started keeping nearby, but it wasn't Carson's SUV. It was a small hybrid, dusty from travel. A woman got out middle-aged, with Carson's sharp features softened by kindness and exhaustion. She looked around uncertainly before approaching. Mr. Briggs, I'm Rebecca Carson Hayes, David Carson's sister. Walter's mouth went dry. Miss Hayes. May I come in? I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to understand what happened. Against his better judgment, Walter led her to the kitchen. She declined coffee, but accepted water, sipping it while studying him with eyes that were Carson's but warmer. David called me last week, she said. First time in 5 years. He was drunk, rambling about finally getting what was owed, about vindication for our father and grandfather. He mentioned your name. I see. Mr. Briggs. I left my family 30 years ago because I couldn't stand the obsession. This ghost they were chasing, this money that supposedly existed, it poisoned everything. My grandfather died bitter. My father drank himself to death. And David let it consume his entire life. He has the money now, Walter said carefully. Or at least some of it. Rebecca laughed bitterly. $10 million, he said. $10 million for 3 generations of misery. Was it worth it? You'd have to ask him that. I'm asking you. You're the one who gave it to him. Walter thought about how to answer. Your grandfather and Thomas King were partners in something during the Korean War. When it ended badly, your grandfather believed he'd been cheated. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but the obsession with getting that money back destroyed both families. I gave your brother what he wanted so it could finally end. But it won't end, Rebecca said quietly. David called me again yesterday. He said the accounts were partially frozen, that he could only access some of the money. He thinks you cheated him. He thinks you're hiding the rest. Walter's blood ran cold. So Carson had discovered Park's deception already. He's wrong, Walter said. I gave him everything I had. Rebecca studied him for a long moment. I believe you. But David won't. He's planning something, Mr. Briggs. I don't know what, but he mentioned your family, your daughter in Atlanta. Walter stood so quickly his chair fell over. If he threatens my family, which is why I'm here, to warn you, and to offer my help. Why would you help me? Because I've spent 30 years trying to atone for what my family has done. Because I became a social worker to help people instead of hurt them. And because this needs to end. She pulled out a business card writing something on the back. This is David's therapist from years ago when he was court-ordered to get treatment, Dr. Marcus Stone. He might have insights that could help. And this, she turned the card over, is the number for the FBI agent who investigated David in the 90s, Agent Sarah Coleman. She's retired now, but she might remember something useful. Walter took the card. Thank you. There's one more thing. David mentioned a name, Park Sung-ho. He said Park was supposed to be dead, but wasn't. He seemed fixated on finding him. Park is dead now. Died last week. Rebecca nodded slowly. Good. Then at least he's beyond David's reach. After she left, Walter immediately called Sarah, telling her to be extra careful. Then he called Jim Dalton, updating him on Carson's potential return. Finally, he called the FBI number Rebecca had given him. Sarah Coleman answered on the third ring, her voice raspy with age, but alert. Miss Coleman, my name is Walter Briggs. Rebecca Carson Hayes gave me your number. It's about David Carson. There was a pause. David Carson. Now there's a name I haven't heard in years. What's he done now? Walter explained the situation, the whole tangled mess of it. Coleman listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of understanding. Carson was always obsessed with that Korean War money, she said when he finished. We investigated him in the 90s for extortion, conspiracy, bunch of other charges. Could never make anything stick. He was too smart, too careful, but the obsession was always there. Any advice on dealing with him? Don't underestimate him. He's patient, methodical, and completely ruthless when it comes to that money. If he thinks you have more, he won't stop. But here's the thing. He's also predictable. Everything he does is about recovering what he thinks was stolen. Use that against him. How? Give him what he wants, but on your terms. Control the situation and document everything. Carson's smart, but he's not perfect. He'll make a mistake eventually. After they hung up, Walter sat thinking. He had $20 million in account numbers hidden in his pantry money that rightfully belonged to Thomas King's descendants. He had David Carson possibly planning another assault. And he had an elderly man's death that had set all of this in motion. He made a decision. Walking to his workshop, he retrieved a small digital recorder he used for making notes about projects. Then he went to the pantry and retrieved Park's second journal. Speaking clearly into the recorder, he began, My name is Walter Briggs. Today is April 15th, 2024. I want to create a record of everything that has happened in case something happens to me. For the next 2 hours, he told the entire story. Finding the box, Carson's threats, meeting Park, the 2 journals, everything. When he finished, he sealed the recorder and the journal in a waterproof bag and walked out to the shed. The hole where the original box had been buried was still visible, though he'd filled it in partially. Now he dug it out again, going deeper this time. At about 4 feet, he placed the bag, then filled the hole completely, packing the earth down hard. If something happened to him, eventually someone would dig here again. They'd find the truth. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every sound could be Carson returning. Every shadow could hide a threat. Around 3 in the morning, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you're clever. Park thought he was clever too. Look how that ended." Walter didn't respond. Let Carson make his threats. Let him stew in his anger. Walter was done being afraid. The next morning, Pete came by early, concern written on his face. "Louise saw strange cars again last night, driving slow, watching your place." "I know. Carson's back." "Damn it, Walter. You need to leave. Go stay with Sarah for a while." "No. This is my home. Martha's home. I'm not leaving." Pete studied him for a long moment. "Then I'm staying here. Got my deer rifle in the truck." "Pete, no." "Don't argue with me, Walter Briggs. You might be too stubborn to run, but I'm too stubborn to let you face this alone." Before Walter could protest further, another car pulled up. Mike Harrison, off-duty but armed. "Sheriff sent me," Mike said. "Unofficial protection. He can't assign official units without cause, but nothing says I can't visit a friend." By noon, Walter's farm had become an armed camp. Pete and Mike inside Jim Dalton, stopping by every few hours, even Sarah and David driving down from Atlanta, despite Walter's protests. "If he wants a fight," Sarah said, her prosecutor's fire burning bright, "he'll get one." But Carson didn't attack, not physically. Instead, that afternoon, a process server arrived with legal documents. Carson was suing Walter for fraud, claiming he'd been given false information about the Swiss accounts. He was demanding damages of $20 million, the exact amount that was supposedly missing. Sarah read through the lawsuit with professional interest. "He's got no case. He can't prove you knew about any other accounts. Hell, he can't even prove the first journal came from you without admitting to extortion. So, why file it?" "To harass you, to make your life difficult, to force you to reveal what you know in discovery." Walter thought about the second journal buried now behind the shed. Even if Carson got a court order to search the property, he'd never think to look in the same spot twice. That evening, as they all sat around Walter's kitchen table, planning their legal response, the power went out. Everyone tensed hands, moving to weapons, but it was just a blown transformer down the road. The power company said it would be hours before they could fix it. They lit candles and continued talking by lamplight. It reminded Walter of nights during storms when Martha was alive, the two of them playing cards by candlelight, laughing at the inconvenience. "Tell me about Martha," Sarah said suddenly. "Tell me about Mom when she was young." Walter looked at his daughter in surprise. She rarely asked about her mother, as if the memories were too painful. "She was fearless," Walter said slowly. "When we met, I was just back from Vietnam, jumpy as a cat, afraid of my own shadow. But your mother, she wasn't afraid of anything. She saw me having a panic attack at a grocery store of all places, and just walked up and started talking to me like we were old friends. Talked me right through it." "I remember her being strong," Sarah said softly, "even when she was sick. The strongest person I ever knew. She would have handled this Carson business better than I have. Probably would have marched right up to him and told him to go to hell." They talked about Martha for the next hour, sharing memories, laughing and crying in equal measure. It was the first time since her death that Walter had been able to talk about her without feeling like he was drowning. The power came back on just after 10. As everyone was preparing to leave or settle in for the night, Walter's phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Briggs." Carson's voice was calm, controlled. "I want to meet tomorrow, noon. Same place as before." "Why would I do that?" "Because I have something you want. Information about Thomas King, about what really happened in Tennessee." Walter's grip on the phone tightened. "What information?" "My grandfather kept journals too, Mr. Briggs, very detailed journals. I think you'd find them interesting. In exchange, you tell me where the rest of the money is, and I'll tell you how Thomas King really died." After Carson hung up, Walter stood staring at his phone. Did he really want to know? After everything, did the details of Thomas King's death matter? "You're not going," Sarah said immediately. "He's right," Mike agreed. "It's obviously a trap." But Walter was thinking about Robert Martin, Thomas King's son. Didn't he deserve to know what really happened to his father? Didn't that knowledge have value beyond money? I'll go, Walter said quietly, but not alone, and not unarmed. They argued for another hour, but Walter's mind was made up. He'd spent too many years leaving stones, unturned questions unasked. Martha would have wanted to know the truth. She always did. That night, alone in his bedroom, Walter pulled out the bronze star Carson had sent him. Thomas King had earned this saving Harold Carson's life. Before everything went wrong, they'd been brothers in arms. Maybe understanding how that brotherhood had turned to murder would help make sense of everything. He thought about Park Sung-ho dead now, but finally at peace. Park had said some debts could only be paid in full. Maybe the truth about Thomas King's death was the final payment. Outside, he could hear Pete and Mike talking quietly, keeping watch, his protectors, his friends. Tomorrow he would face Carson again, but this time he wouldn't be alone. This time he had family, not just Sarah and David, but this whole community that had rallied around him. The morning came gray and humid, promising storms later. Walter dressed carefully, putting the Colt in one pocket and his phone in another, making sure the recording app was ready. Sarah had wanted to wire him, but there wasn't time to get proper equipment. At 11:30, they set out Walter in his truck, Mike and Pete following at a distance, Sarah and David waiting at the sheriff's office with Jim Dalton ready to respond if needed. Carson was already there when Walter arrived, standing by the disturbed earth where it had all started. He looked different. Haggard, unshaven, his expensive clothes wrinkled. The $10 million hadn't brought him peace. "Mr. Briggs," Carson said as Walter approached, "thank you for coming." "You said you had information." Carson pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "My grandfather's account of October 15th, 1953, the day Thomas King died." He opened it to a marked page and began to read "Found King in Townsend, Tennessee." He was waiting for us, almost like he wanted to be found. We talked for 3 hours in his motel room. He kept saying the money was gone, that he'd given it away, thrown it in the ocean. I didn't believe him. When I showed him the photographs of his family, he broke. Said he'd buried half on the family farm, hid the rest where no one would find it. I wanted to let him go then, but Morrison insisted. Said King knew too much could expose the whole operation. The drive to the ravine was silent. King didn't fight, just asked that we make sure his family was safe. I gave him my word. Morrison pushed the car over himself. I still see King's face, sometimes calm as a man going to sleep. He knew it was coming, had known all along. Carson closed the journal. Morrison was my grandfather's enforcer, died in prison in the 70s. But the point is, Mr. Briggs Thomas King told them the truth. The money was split. Half buried here, which you found. The other half hidden somewhere else. Park had it, and you have access to it. I gave you everything Park gave me. No, you gave me part of it. 10 million instead of 30. Did you think I wouldn't check? Wouldn't dig deeper? Walter stayed silent. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. Carson continued, I could hurt you, threaten your family, make your life miserable. But I'm tired, Mr. Briggs. 3 generations of this obsession, and I'm tired, so I'm going to make you a different offer. He pulled out a document. This is a legal agreement. You sign over any claim to the remaining Swiss accounts, and I drop the lawsuit, disappear from your life forever. You can keep your farm, your peace, your family's safety. All I want is what's mine. It's not yours, Walter said quietly. It never was. Your grandfather was a killer and a thief who betrayed his partners. The money belongs to Thomas King's family. Carson's face darkened. King's family has lived 70 years without it. They don't even know it exists. Why protect money for people who don't need it when you could end this all right now? It was a fair question. Robert Martin had built a good life without his father's blood money. His children and grandchildren were successful, educated, comfortable. They didn't need $20 million, but it wasn't about need. It was about justice, about honoring Thomas King's sacrifice and Park Sung-ho's final wishes. I can't give you what I don't have, Walter said finally. Carson studied him for a long moment. Then he laughed, bitter and exhausted. You know what the funny thing is? The 10 million I can access. It's more money than I could spend in a lifetime. But it's not about the money anymore. It's about winning, about validating 3 generations of pain and obsession. Your grandfather won, Walter said. He killed Thomas King. He destroyed 2 families. Isn't that enough winning? Carson was quiet for a moment, looking at the disturbed earth where the box had been buried. My sister Rebecca called me yesterday. First time in 5 years. She said I was becoming our grandfather, that the obsession was eating me alive just like it ate him. She's right, you know. I can feel it consuming me, but I can't stop. It's like a hereditary disease. You can stop. You have $10 million. You could go anywhere, do anything, become anyone. You could break the cycle. Could I? Carson looked at him with haunted eyes. Can you break something that's been built into your bones since birth? Every bedtime story was about the stolen money. Every family gathering ended with my grandfather raging about Thomas King. It's not just what I want, it's who I am. For the first time, Walter felt pity for the man. Carson was as much a victim of this ancient conflict as anyone. Your grandfather's dead, Walter said gently. Your father's dead. The only person keeping this alive is you. Carson stood there for a long moment, his grandfather's journal clutched in his hands. Then slowly he held it out to Walter. Take it. Give it to King's son if he's still alive. Let him know his father died bravely, that he protected his family to the end. Walter took the journal, surprised by the gesture. Carson turned to leave, then stopped. The other $20 million, I know it exists. I know you have access to it, but I'm going to choose to walk away, not because I don't want it, but because Rebecca was right. If I don't stop now, I never will. What will you do? Carson smiled sadly. Disappear, like Thomas King did. Maybe that's the only way any of us escape this, by vanishing completely. He walked to his SUV and drove away. Walter stood there holding Harold Carson's journal, watching until the vehicle disappeared down the county road. He knew he might see Carson again. Obsessions that deep didn't die easily, but something felt finished. Some circle had been closed. When he got home, the others were waiting anxiously. He showed them the journal, explained what had happened. You think he's really gone? Sarah asked. For now, maybe forever. He seemed tired, defeated almost. That evening, Walter called Robert Martin. Mr. Martin, I have something that belongs to you, your father's story, the truth about what happened. Would you like to know? There was a long silence. I've spent 70 years not knowing. I'm not sure I want to start now. I understand, but if you change your mind, it's here waiting for you. A week later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Swiss bank account numbers and a note. The rest of what Park had. Do what you think is right. D.C. Walter stared at the paper for a long time. Carson had found the other accounts but was walking away from them. It was either the most elaborate trap ever constructed or a genuine attempt to end the cycle. He made a decision. Taking the paper and Park's second journal from behind the flower bin, he drove to Atlanta. Sarah met him at her office. I need you to do something complicated, he told her. I need you to set up a foundation, the Thomas King Memorial Foundation, for veterans' families maybe, or Korean War orphans. Something good, something that turns blood money into something worthwhile. Sarah studied the documents he gave her. This is $20 million, Dad. I know. You could keep it. No one would know. I would know. Martha would know somehow, and that's enough. It took 3 months to set everything up properly, to launder the money through enough legal channels that its origin became obscure. The foundation was established with Sarah as the director, and Robert Martin once Walter finally convinced him as honorary chairman. They held the first board meeting on a sunny day in July in Sarah's conference room in Atlanta. Robert Martin was there, dignified and quiet, still processing the father he'd never known. Rebecca Carson Hayes had agreed to join the board, seeing it as a way to atone for her family's sins. Even Pete and Louise were there, representing what Sarah called community stakeholders. The Thomas King Memorial Foundation's mission, Sarah read from the charter, is to support families affected by war, particularly those who have lost fathers in service to their country. We will provide scholarships, counseling services, and emergency financial assistance to those in need. Robert Martin stood slowly. I want to say something. My father, I spent my whole life wondering who he was, why he left, whether he ever thought about us. Now I know he died protecting us. That knowledge is worth more than any amount of money. But this foundation turning his sacrifice into something that helps others, I think he would have approved. Rebecca Carson Hayes spoke next. My family spent 3 generations consumed by hatred and greed. This foundation is a chance to transform that negative energy into something positive. It's a chance for redemption. After the meeting, Walter stood outside with Robert Martin. The older man was holding a copy of his father's service record, complete with the Bronze Star citation. He was a hero, Robert said quietly. Before everything went wrong, he was a genuine hero. Most people are complicated, Walter replied. Good and bad mixed together. Your father made some questionable choices, but in the end he chose to protect his family. That's what matters. Robert nodded, then surprised Walter by embracing him. Thank you for everything. As Walter drove home that evening, he felt lighter than he had in months. The money was gone, transformed into something useful. The Carsons had their partial payment and had chosen to walk away from the rest. Thomas King's family had the truth, and Walter had his life back. The farm looked peaceful in the evening light. The new back door was solid and secure. The disturbed earth behind the shed had been planted with wildflowers, which were now blooming in a riot of colors. He could see Pete's truck in his driveway, probably checking on him again. He thought about Martha, what she would have made of all this. She would have been proud, he thought, of how he'd handled it. She always said he was too stubborn for his own good, but sometimes stubbornness was just another word for integrity. His phone rang. Sarah. Dad, I just wanted you to know the Foundation's first scholarship recipient has been selected. A young woman whose father died in Afghanistan when she was 2. Full ride to college. That's wonderful, sweetheart. It is. Dad, what you did giving up that money, it was the right thing. I know. I love you. I love you too. After they hung up, Walter sat on his porch watching the sunset. The evening was quiet except for birdsong and the distant sound of a tractor. Normal sounds of a normal life. He thought about Thomas King and Harold Carson and Park Sung-ho, 3 young men who'd formed a brotherhood in war and been destroyed by greed. He thought about David Carson carrying the weight of inherited obsession, hopefully free of it now. He thought about all the lives touched by that buried box, all the pain and fear, and ultimately perhaps redemption. The wildflowers behind the shed swayed in the evening breeze, bright splashes of color over the spot where secrets had been buried. Walter had considered having the spot excavated completely, making sure nothing else was hidden there, but decided against it. Some mysteries were better left undisturbed. As darkness fell, he went inside and locked the door, a habit now where it never had been before. In his bedroom, Martha's picture still sat on the nightstand, her young face frozen in eternal optimism. It's over, he told her picture. It's finally over. But even as he said it, he wondered if anything was ever truly over. The Foundation would continue Thomas King's story in a new way. David Carson was out there somewhere, hopefully building a new life, but possibly planning a return. The FBI was still investigating the Korean War connections. The ripples from that buried box would continue spreading, touching lives in ways he couldn't predict. Still, for now, there was peace. Walter prepared for bed, his movements routine and comfortable. Tomorrow he would work in his shop, maybe finish that rocking chair he'd started so many years ago. He would have coffee with Pete, call Sarah, and Michael tend his garden. He would live the quiet life he'd chosen, the life Martha would have wanted for him. Outside, an owl called in the darkness, and another answered from across the field. The sound was lonely, but not sad. A reminder that life continued its ancient rhythms regardless of human drama. Walter turned off the light and lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar creaks and settling of the old house. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly safe. The Colt still sat in his nightstand drawer, but he didn't think he'd need it anymore. As sleep finally took him, he dreamed not of buried boxes or threatening men, but of Martha Young and laughing, planting wildflowers in the spring sunshine. In the dream, she looked up at him and smiled. "You did good, Walter," she said. "You did real good." And for the first time since he'd put that shovel into the earth behind his shed, Walter believed it might be true. The weeks that followed brought an unexpected visitor to Walter's farm. On a humid Thursday morning in early August, a black sedan with government plates pulled into his driveway. Walter watched from his porch as two people emerged, a young woman in a crisp suit and an older man whose military bearing was unmistakable despite his civilian clothes. "Mr. Briggs?" The woman approached with confident steps. "I'm Special Agent Jennifer Park with the FBI, and this is Colonel James Mitchell, retired from the Army's Historical Crimes Division." Walter set down his coffee carefully. "I've been expecting you." They sat in his living room, the agents declining his offer of refreshments. Agent Park pulled out a tablet while Colonel Mitchell studied the photographs on Walter's mantel, family pictures spanning decades, Martha's smile present in most of them. "Mr. Briggs," Agent Park began, "we've been investigating financial crimes connected to the Korean War for several years. The documents you turned over to local law enforcement have provided crucial evidence in several cold cases." "I just found a box," Walter said carefully. "Nothing more." Colonel Mitchell turned from the photographs. "Mr. Briggs, I served 3 tours in Korea across 2 different wars. I know what that conflict did to men, the things they saw, the choices they had to make. Thomas King's story isn't unique. There were dozens of similar operations, men who blurred the lines between military service and personal gain. Are you here to condemn him?" "No," Mitchell said firmly. "I'm here to understand, and maybe to offer some closure. You see, we've been tracking Swiss accounts connected to Korean War operations for decades. Most led nowhere, the account holders long dead, the money frozen in bureaucratic limbo. But the King Carson Park operation was different. It was one of the most successful and ultimately most tragic." Agent Park pulled up files on her tablet. "We've documented at least 12 deaths connected to this money over the years. Not just Thomas King and Harold Carson, but others, competitors, witnesses, people who asked too many questions. The money trail is soaked in blood." Walter thought about the foundation they'd established, trying to transform that blood money into something positive. "What do you want from me?" "Information," Park said. "We know David Carson accessed accounts in Switzerland. We know a foundation was recently established with suspicious funding sources. We're not here to prosecute anyone. The statute of limitations has long passed on most of these crimes. But we need to document everything for our historical record." "And," Mitchell added, "there's the matter of remains." Walter's blood chilled. "Remains. We've been searching for Thomas King's body for 40 years, Mitchell explained. His family deserves closure. Real closure, not just stories and assumptions. We believe David Carson might have information about the location." "Carson's gone," Walter said. "Disappeared weeks ago." "We know, but you had contact with him. Did he say anything about the specific location in Tennessee? Any details about the disposal site?" Walter thought about Harold Carson's journal still locked in his desk drawer. He'd meant to give it to Robert Martin, but hadn't found the right moment. Now he retrieved it, handing it to Mitchell. The colonel read the relevant passage, his face grave. "Townsend, Tennessee. The ravine near Cades Cove. This is more specific than anything we've had before." "You're going to search for him?" "With the family's permission, yes. Robert Martin has already agreed. He wants to bury his father properly next to his mother in California." They talked for another hour, Walter carefully editing his story to protect the foundation while providing what information he could. As they prepared to leave, Agent Park turned back. "Mr. King." "Briggs, you did the right thing. Most people who find that kind of money disappear with it. You stayed and faced the consequences. That takes courage." After they left, Walter called Robert Martin. "They told me," Robert said when he answered, "about searching for my father. I'm not sure how I feel about it. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." "No, I want them to search. It's just, for 70 years he's been both dead and not dead in my mind. Schrodinger's father, you might say. Finding his body makes it real in a way it never was before." 2 weeks later, they found him. The call came on a Sunday morning. Colonel Mitchell's voice was gentle but firm. "We've recovered remains from a ravine near Townsend. DNA confirms it's Thomas King. He had his dog tags in his pocket sealed in a cigarette case. He wanted to be found eventually." Walter drove to California for the funeral. It was a small affair. Robert and his family, a few representatives from the military. Rebecca Carson Hayes, who'd flown in from Portland, and Walter. They buried Thomas King next to his wife in a cemetery overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Robert spoke at the graveside. My father was a complicated man who made complicated choices. He wasn't perfect, but he loved his family. In the end, that love led him to sacrifice everything to protect us. I choose to remember that love, not the mistakes that preceded it. The military provided full honors, the folded flag, the playing of taps, the rifle salute. Walter thought Thomas King would have appreciated the dignity of it, the acknowledgement of his service despite everything that came after. That evening, Walter found himself walking on the beach with Rebecca Carson Hayes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him of Georgia summer evenings. My brother called me last week, Rebecca said suddenly, from Costa Rica. He's bought a boat, plans to sail around the world. Is he happy? I don't know. He sounded empty, like he'd achieved his life's goal and didn't know what to do next. $10 million and nothing to spend it on except running away. Maybe running is what he needs. Maybe. She picked up a shell, examining it before tossing it back into the waves. The foundation is doing good work. I've been reviewing the scholarship applications. So many families torn apart by war, so many children growing up without fathers. Like Robert. And like David and me, in a way. Our father was there physically, but consumed by his father's obsession. We were war orphans too, just a different kind of war. They walked in comfortable silence until the sun disappeared below the horizon. Back at the hotel, Walter found a message from Sarah. The foundation had received an anonymous donation of $5 million. The Swiss bank transfer was untraceable, but Walter knew. David Carson was trying to buy his way to redemption, or at least to peace. The next morning before flying home, Walter visited the cemetery one last time. Someone had left fresh flowers on Thomas King's grave, wildflowers, like the ones Walter had planted behind his shed. The headstone was simple. Thomas K., King beloved, husband and father. 1928 to 1953, finally home. Standing there in the morning mist, Walter felt the weight of the past few months settling into perspective. He'd been drawn into a 70-year-old tragedy, had faced danger and moral complexity he'd never expected in his quiet retirement. But he'd also helped bring closure to a family, had transformed blood money into hope for future generations, had stood his ground when it mattered. The flight home was turbulent storm systems moving across the country. Walter gripped the armrest during the worst of it, thinking about mortality and chance, and the strange paths life takes. If Martha hadn't died, if he hadn't been alone and restless, would he have ever dug up that mound? Would Thomas King still be lying in that Tennessee ravine unmourned and unfound? Pete met him at the airport, full of local gossip. The hardware store was closing, bought out by a chain. The Hendersons were getting divorced after 40 years. Life in rural Georgia continued its slow rhythm, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded on Walter's farm. That evening, sitting on his porch with a beer, Walter saw a figure walking up his drive. His hand moved instinctively toward where he used to keep the Colt, but then he recognized the stride. It was Mike Harrison, off duty, carrying a six-pack. "Thought you might want some company," Mike said, settling into the other rocking chair. They drank in companionable silence, watching fireflies dance across the lawn. Finally, Mike spoke. "Jim wanted me to tell you the FBI cleared everything. No charges, no further investigation. The foundation's in the clear." "That's good." "You did something remarkable, Walter. Not many men would have given up that kind of money." "It wasn't mine to keep." "Still," Mike raised his beer in a toast, "to doing the right thing even when it's hard." They clinked bottles and drank. The night settled around them, peaceful and ordinary. Somewhere in Costa Rica, David Carson was learning to sail. In Oregon, Robert Martin was probably looking at the folded flag from his father's funeral, finally able to mourn properly. In Portland, Rebecca was reviewing scholarship applications, turning her family's dark legacy into light. And in a small cemetery in California, Thomas King lay beside his beloved Margaret. Their long separation finally ended. The war was over, at last, all debts paid, all secrets revealed. Walter thought about the empty space behind his shed where he'd reburied the recorder and the second journal insurance that had never been needed. Tomorrow he'd dig them up, destroy them properly, let the past bury its dead completely. As Mike left and Walter prepared for bed, he found himself humming an old song Martha used to love, something about peace in the valley. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like home again, like a place where life had happened and would continue to happen. The last thing he did before turning off the lights was to look at the photograph Agent Park had left him, the one from the box showing Thomas King Harold Carson and Park Sung-ho young and alive in Korea before everything went wrong. He'd have it framed, he decided, not as a trophy or a reminder of danger, but as a testament to how wrong things could go when brothers turned against each other and how even the deepest wounds could eventually heal. In his dreams that night, Walter saw them all. Thomas and Margaret King dancing at their wedding, Park Sung-ho as a young man full of hope, even Harold Carson before bitterness consumed him. They were all young, all alive, all unaware of the tragedy that awaited them. But in the dream, Walter could also see further to Robert Martin teaching his students, to the Foundation scholarship recipients graduating college, to Rebecca's social work saving lives. The tragedy had spawned triumph. The blood money had become healing balm. He woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window and the sound of birds singing. It was a new day, free of the shadow that had hung over his farm. The mound was gone, the secrets exposed, the dead properly buried. Walter Briggs rose, made his coffee, and stepped onto his porch to greet the morning. Life waited, patient and ordinary and precious. He was 72 years old, a widower, a father, a man who had faced darkness and chosen light. The wildflowers behind the shed swayed in the morning breeze, a riot of color where shadows once lay. Beauty from ashes, hope from despair. It was, Walter thought, exactly what Martha would have wanted.